It's a pleasure to be here. I want to just thank Albia and Channel 6 and Temple University for the opportunity to be here with you all this evening. And I'm thrilled to see so many students in the room tonight. So I hope that you find that this is a worthwhile experience for you. So I'm a county commissioner and I'm serving in my 3rd term. So I'm in my 11th year already serving in the executive branch of government. Prior to that, by trade, I'm an accountant. Prior to that, I held a number of senior management roles, but most recently in corporate accounting for a major publishing company here in Pennsylvania. So I've worked as an executive for already a very long time. And I think we're going to get a little bit of an opportunity to talk later about our vision for the office. But I will tell you that there are a lot of ways that you can be a leader in your community that don't have to do with the job description that sort of checks off boxes about do this, do this, do this, do this. So it's been my privilege to lead a number of efforts in my home county of Chester, as well as statewide, since I am the first vice president of our state association, as well as the vice chair of the Democratic caucus for that same state association.
Thank you.
Thank you. So it may not seem like it, but there is a very large immigrant community in Chester County. Some of you may or may not know that Kennett Square is the mushroom capital of the world and relies very, very heavily on immigrants who do amazing work in that industry and other agricultural industries. In addition, agriculture is the #1 aggregate industry in our community. So I have been working very closely with a lot of the businesses in our community to deal with the problems that they're having in hiring people because too many people are afraid. So we should be treating people with respect. And the idea that somehow we should, as a community or a government, be doing ICE's job for them is outrageous. So we should do everything we possibly can to make sure that our immigrants, or our immigrant community, is treated with respect and dignity. So I would support the continued proliferation of those ideas that would do just that. Character does matter, and it matters a great deal. And I think that people should vote for the person that they believe will most likely represent their interests. I am the minority in the Board of Commissioners. There's 3 commissioners and 2 Republicans and myself. Despite that, I was elected vice chair of the board in 2011 because I earned the respect and the trust of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. That doesn't mean that we all agree. In fact, we have disagreed on occasion, on and off. If we don't make it personal, we respect each other, we treat each other with respect, we debate our hearts out, and it either goes forward or it doesn't. But I have never once compromised the principles and the values that I believe in just because I didn't want to lose a vote. So I think it's really important. I think character absolutely does matter.
Mr. Cozzone?
So it's an awful, awful issue that affects so many communities and families. And the reality is that it is certainly a problem for the person who is addicted, but the snowball effect on the families of those folks is putting a lot of strain on all of our other systems. Look, this is not a one-size-fits-all solution. We understand that at the county level. We're where the rubber meets the road, where the services are provided. We have to look at all options. So I know there's a debate about medically assisted treatment. There's a debate about needle exchanges. There's a debate about a lot of other ways. But what we need to do is solve the problem of the individual addict. Not every addict is gonna respond to every kind of treatment. We need to make sure that treatment is available for all of them in the way in which it works for them. We also have to focus more on handoffs. There's a lot that happens. Somebody overdoses, they get naloxone, they go to the emergency room, and then there's nowhere for them to go. Or the doctor says, here's a card, call this person when you get out. We have to work harder and smarter together in our communities, and we've been doing that in Chester County and around the state. I was at a forum a couple of weeks ago to do just that, to get people into treatment. And very, very quickly, I will also say that our insurance companies have to pay for what it takes to get somebody sober, not for what they think it takes to get somebody sober. Yes, and it's a function of, it's not just a function of the funding formula, it's also a function of too much reliance on property tax to fund our schools. So we're at about 35% funded from the state, which is based on an income tax. It used to be, the school districts used to all get about 50% of their funding from the state. So we have to talk about how we reverse that trend and stop relying so heavily on property tax, particularly in those areas where there isn't the opportunity or the valuable properties that are adding to the schools. So it's not just the funding formula, it's where the funding is coming from. And secondly, it's also about giving our teachers the flexibility to be able to teach students in a way that they will learn, and stop spending so much time having our teachers do nothing but teach to tests that don't do anything, in most cases, to establish whether or not a school or a school system is a good school or school system. I'm a product of public education. My son is getting a public education. It's really, really important, and it's, in my opinion, a right for every child in this Commonwealth and in this country to have that free public education and a quality education. So there are entirely too many people in our jails who don't belong there. And as Lieutenant Governor, I would very seriously take on the role of bringing people together to work on real criminal justice reform. That would include from the whole spectrum of criminal justice, from the first contact with law enforcement to a person's eligibility and access to pardons. Having been responsible for running with my colleagues numerous departments, I understand how to change processes so that they become more efficient, and I can do that as Lieutenant Governor as it relates to the pardons process. But I also want to talk about how we're ending up putting so many people in jail in the first place. I've been working on several criminal justice issues, but one of them relates very specifically to people with mental illness who committed nonviolent crimes who are spending way too much time in jail. In fact, jail has become the place where those folks go. There's a national initiative that I've been involved with. We've brought it to my county, we've translated it to the state, where we can do an awful lot to prevent people from even getting arrested in the first place, so that there is no record. We have to focus from the beginning to the end of that spectrum if we're going to address this issue.
Thank you.
So Pennsylvania has a revenue problem. That's a fact. For the last several years, the budget has been short $2 to $3 billion. And while the legislature has been cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting, particularly funding that goes to counties to provide services for the most vulnerable people in our communities, we, as taxpayers, whether we're paying income tax or property tax, are caring for those people in the most expensive ways possible. So we have to address the revenue side of the equation. We need to have a severance tax. We have an asset in our Commonwealth that this Commonwealth is getting nothing for. In many instances, that product is being shipped overseas for use overseas. It's not even being used in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We can look at sales tax, but we have to be very, very careful about sales tax, because some of the proposals are proposing to expand sales tax on things like clothing and food, which would adversely impact the most vulnerable people in our communities. And yes, we do need to talk about taxes based on people's ability to pay. And the only way that can happen is through an income tax. There has to be a combination of all those things. I will not leave here being called a tax that's been liberal. I will leave here being called fiscally responsible, because every budget the Republicans have tried to pass the last 3 years has been fiscally irresponsible.
You're taking liberties with our 60-second rule.
I'm trying. I put my spit up.
Commissioner Cozzone.
So, for all the reasons that everyone's already stated, I mean, fracking is here, it is what it is, it shouldn't be expanded, and we need to start moving to more green economy. But I will say this, the drillers and the pipeline operators need to be held accountable. Part of the problem is that this whole process isn't really regulated in any one place. I was fortunate enough to be appointed by Governor Wolf as the county government work group chair of the Pipeline Infrastructure Task Force. The pipeline that some of these folks are talking about goes right through my neighborhood. But Chester County, 700 square miles, we have over 600 miles of pipeline. I've been involved in this issue since 2008. Nobody's held accountable. The DEP doesn't have enough resources. The accountability rests mostly with the federal government, sometimes with the DEP, sometimes with the PUC, and we have to be able to pass legislation that allows our communities and our residents and our citizens to decide what happens in their communities. There is the Pipeline Infrastructure Task Force report is already out there, and if I'm elected your next lieutenant governor, I will make sure that the recommendations in that report start to get some traction.